Since Trump took office for the second time, the entire world has been in a frenzy. Trump has made numerous changes in a short period of time that the world has been accustomed to, such as stopping US foreign aid and pulling out of the Paris Agreement. Trump's recent executive order, which suspended financing for US help, has sent shockwaves around the globe. One Sahelian African leader appears unconcerned with Trump's decision, despite the fact that nearly everyone has condemned it. You could even claim that he supports Trump's choice. This leader is none other than Burkina Faso President Traore. According to Traore, Trump's move will help African nations become more autonomous and self-sufficient. For this reason, he has recently taken various actions to boost Burkina Faso's rice production. In this video, we'll demonstrate the advancements Burkina Faso has made in rice production, provide an overview of USAID, and discuss Traore's thoughts on President Trump's choice. Let's begin. President Traore ordered Madame Mariana Connet, the governor of the Burkina Faso province of Hautes-Bassins, to visit the wheat field in the developed plain of Basin on Friday, January 31, 2025. All of President Traore's statements were validated by the current work. Financial assistance from the United States or any other country is not necessary for Burkina Faso or other African countries. Burkina Faso is currently poised to make history with its rice and wheat fields, which, once produced, have the potential to become self-sufficient in rice. Thanks to Traore's significant investment in the industry, the rice and wheat plants here are not only growing but also thriving. Traore made a strong statement about Burkina Faso's need to attain food security when he initially took office. As you can see, Burkina Faso has good area for growing rice, same as other African nations. However, Burkina Faso has long been one of the major importers of international rice. This is a result of the strong demand for rice, a main meal in the nation. But according to President Traore, it is not a good idea to import rice when the nation has the land to grow it. He therefore made the decision to take action. At the Regional Directorate of Agriculture in Hautes-Bassins, President Traore personally delivered 20 optical sorters to rice mills nationwide in 2024. The equipment was purchased by the National Office of Major Projects for 180 million CFA without taxes, with the goal of raising the standard and competitiveness of rice grown locally. The president stressed improving rice processing capacity in his remarks at the event. In order to ensure that the rice is of the highest quality, we are formally transferring these sorters to you for the benefit of cooperatives and courageous rice growers. We hope to eat rice free of all impurities from now on. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Dr. Abdurrahman Konaid, Special Advisor to the President on Agricultural Issues, described the equipment as strategic for boosting national rice production, saying that the low sorting capacity in part makes national rice uncompetitive and affects the quality of the final product. Konaid explained that these sorters are the latest generation optical sorters, with a capacity of 64 million megapixels, capable of sorting all impurities and calibrating rice grains. The 20 machines vary in processing capacity, with some handling 1.6 tons per hour, and others that can process 4 to 6 tons per hour. Dr. Konaid also mentioned that training programs would be set up to ensure proper use of the equipment. Seydou Konaid, president of the Hautes-Bassins Rice Innovation Platform, spoke on behalf of rice processors and said, "With the arrival of these technologically advanced machines, it is a sign of relief for us. Our rice will have nothing to envy imported rice," adding that it will give national rice production more quality and competitiveness, and the rice made in Burkina Faso will take on much more value. Now, nearly a year has passed since Traore delivered these machines, and his efforts are starting to pay off. He also praised the government's efforts and the assistance given to farmers. emphasizing that this initial experience will enable them to gain knowledge and enhance wheat and rice output in the years to come. "We are mobilized and available to do better." The governor expressed her satisfaction with the crop's current condition. "At the spiling stage, I observed wheat plants in good physiognomy." According to her, this demonstrates that the farmers have heeded the recommendations and directives of agricultural professionals. It inspired farmers to work even harder to help achieve food self-sufficiency. This is when things start to get interesting. The governor was informed by the wheat flour manufacturing facility, Le Moulin du Sahel, that they are determined to purchase all of the wheat produced this season. This is impressive. As a result, not only is the area growing wheat, but factories are also prepared to use it domestically rather than importing it from elsewhere. Burkina Faso is clearly headed toward food self-sufficiency, even if much more work needs to be done. You might also be interested in learning that rice production rose from 280,000 metric tons in 2022, when Traore took office, to 326,000 metric tons in 2024. This is impressive, but the production of wheat and rice has also greatly improved. According to projections, Burkina Faso's GDP grew from $18.8 billion to $22.1 billion in 2023, with the agriculture sector accounting for 16.33% of the total. In 2024, 360,000 metric tons of tomatoes were produced, up from 315,000 metric tons in 2022. In 2024, millet production reached 1.1 million metric tons, up from 907,000 metric tons in 2022. This is impressive. Once more, Traore's significant investment in the sector is responsible for all of this. However, Traore's belief and attitude are the main reasons for his involvement in the industry. According to Traore, African nations ought to be autonomous and self-sufficient. This is why, rather of turning to the supposedly more developed economies and requesting their assistance, Burkina Faso made the wise decision to add value to the resources that God has gifted them with. For this reason, Traore supports President Trump's decision to halt USAID funding. What is USAID, though, and why is Trump's choice upsetting people? From the start of his campaign, Trump has made it apparent that he wants foreign expenditures to closely match his America First philosophy. For this reason, he said last week on his Truth Social page that U.S. assistance spending is completely unaccountable. Shut it down. In order to manage humanitarian assistance initiatives on behalf of the American government, the United States Agency for International Development was established in the early 1960s. Two-thirds of its 10,000 employees are employed abroad, according to the Congressional Research Service. It operates in dozens of countries and has bases in over 60. However, other groups that USAID contracts with and funds to the majority of the work on the ground. It engages in a wide variety of activities. For instance, USAID not only supplies food to starving nations, but also runs the gold standard famine detection system in the world, which analyzes data to attempt and forecast where food shortages may occur. A large portion of USAID's funding goes toward health initiatives, including providing polio vaccines in places where the disease is still prevalent and assisting in the containment of viruses that could start a pandemic. Government data now shows that the United States spent $68 billion on foreign aid in 2023. That sum is dispersed among numerous agencies and departments. However, the U.S. aid budget, which amounts to over $40 billion, makes up more than half of it. Humanitarian operations in Ukraine account for the majority of U.S. aid spending, which is concentrated in Asia, Africa, and Europe. For this reason, experts have predicted that the suspension of aid will have a negative impact on African nations. President Trump has now claimed that financing from USAID is a waste of tax dollars. A list of USAID initiatives that his administration claimed demonstrated waste and abuse was released. These programs included a $1.5 million grant to an LGBT organization in Serbia, a $2.5 million grant for electric vehicles in Vietnam, and a $6 million grant for tourism in Egypt. However, Trump is hardly the only person opposed to USAID. The richest billionaire in the world and ardent Trump supporter, Elon Musk, has also voiced disapproval of USAID. He claims that Trump has decided to shutter the aid agency, which he claims is a criminal enterprise. The globe has been in a frenzy since the executive order that suspended the project's funding because of the consequences. Humanitarian aid initiatives around the world have reportedly been interrupted since the suspension, with all employees placed on leave and the organization's future uncertain. However, what effects has the suspension had on Africa? The HIV/AIDS program in South Africa is one of the many health projects that have benefited greatly from US aid financing in Africa. There were stories of HIV clinics closing, planned training programs being cancelled, and trans health centers in South Africa being forced to close their doors just days following Trump's executive order. The WIT's Reproductive Health and HIV Institute shut down its clinics for its important populations program within a week of Trump's return, blaming the US stopped the AIDS epidemic. Similarly, a grant-writing training sponsored by the US had to be cancelled by the nation's Medical Research Council. Days after Trump suspended the National Institutes of Health's operations and financial support. Funding recipients via the US, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief was notified to cease all operations, including the distribution of HIV antiretroviral medication. Among other countries, PEPFAO provides funding for HIV treatment and intervention initiatives in Botswana, Mozambique, Namibia, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. Additionally, experts have assessed that the freeze may cause emergency responses to epidemics like the Marburg virus and mpox to be disrupted. But Trump's move is a wake-up call for several African specialists. African nations will eventually need to prioritize domestic funding for the health sector and effective public finance management, according to Angela Appigie, assistant professor at the University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. President Traore has been advocating for precisely this message. Given that Africa possesses the human and material resources to be self-sufficient, it is absurd that African nations are too dependent on the West for everything. Trump's recent actions, however, have demonstrated the consequences of this kind of reliance. Consider how Trump's actions would not affect Africa if African nations were not reliant on Western handouts. African nations are currently struggling to cope with the consequences of Trump's actions. However, there's anything noteworthy to mention. Everyone believes that Western aid is essential to Africa. However, that is not accurate in terms of facts. Without a doubt, certain people have profited from the money that was sent in from the West. The majority of Africans, however, have never experienced the effects of the help. For this reason, we think that the suspension of US funding will not affect any other sector in African countries except the health sector. Are you aware of why? This is due to the fact that corrupt officials and their associates wind up with the majority of aid meant for development and poverty relief. The plundering cycle has turned into a systematic illness, denying the much-needed advantages that such funding is supposed to provide to millions of Africans. It begs the question of whether the United States should still give money to Africa in the face of corruption if aid funds are being wasted. Corrupt government officials, bureaucrats, and elites divert a significant amount of the revenues, enriching themselves at the expense of the public, rather than making sure that these resources reach those who need them the most. Shocking instances of misappropriation have been frequently revealed by Transparency International and other anti-corruption watchdogs, with some African leaders hiding stolen money in offshore accounts or purchasing opulent real estate overseas. For example, USAID provides millions of dollars a year to numerous African nations to combat HIV/AIDS, TB, and malaria. There is a shortage of necessary medications in public hospitals, though, as reports indicate that money intended for the purchase of medications and medical equipment is frequently mishandled or embezzled. Mengistu Haile Mariam's Marxist regime in Ethiopia received a significant amount of donor funding, some of which was utilized to forcefully relocate sizable populations. Trucks for the resettlement program were purchased with donor money that was intended for famine assistance. Additionally, because it suited Mengistu's rule to starve its opponents, relief help was purposefully avoided in some of the most devastated districts. Ethiopia, however, is not an anomaly. Additionally, the Congo raised money to buy weapons manufacturing from Italy by selling donated food supplies. The more tranquil Mauritius diverted donated rice, which it insisted be of superior quality, to hotels for tourists. What about the most recent instance in Nigeria, when during the COVID-19 outbreak, palliative care that was supposed to be provided to the populace was instead hoarded and distributed by politicians to those who would support them? The World Bank, the EU, and Western nations are among the contributors of this foreign aid, and they are aware that a large portion of it ends up in the coffers of avaricious African governments and non-governmental organizations. Nevertheless, they still provide help and view them as development partners. If they were sincere about wanting Africa to grow, they could have found another means to aid the continent, wouldn't they? When it is clear that aid is ineffective, why do they continue to pour it out year after year? They are clearly gaining something from it. This leads us to the following point. Africa receives aid as a means of Western exploitation. Remember that article from 2014, where we stated that Africa receives approximately $133.7 billion annually. This sum is substantial, isn't it? But pay attention to this. According to the research, $191.9 billion being taken out of the continent through illicit financial flows, multinational corporation earnings, and debt repayments. Keep in mind that this only applies to 2014. More recent reports indicate that the number is higher. According to this 2014 estimate, Africa loses more than $85 billion annually on average. Such a net outflow implies that Africa is helping the West rather than the other way around. The West is utilizing aid to underdevelop Africa in the same manner that Africa is aiding in the development of the West. The majority of Western humanitarian money provided to Africa has restrictions. Allowing international corporations to establish their businesses in Africa and use our resources is one of these requirements. Last but not least, the dependence that aid in Africa has created on the West is one of the main arguments cited by Africans for the continent to cease receiving foreign help. Aid has grown to be a significant source of government finance in Africa since its inception. In countries like Burundi, Rwanda, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, to mention a few, foreign aid made up between 50% and 92% of total government spending in 2009. Imagine if African nations develop a budget each year. One of the revenue sources is foreign aid. Do you understand why it's so simple for the West to influence these nations to comply with their demands? The West can simply say, "We are stopping aid from being sent to your country unless you do what we say," if they don't. That's what occurred to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger following the coup. This indicates that, like sanctions, aid has turned into a tool that the West uses to exert control over Africa. In addition, local enterprises have been destroyed and innovation has been slowed down by the dependency that the aid delivered to Africa has generated. It has stifled the spirit of entrepreneurship and undermined the local marketplaces. Consider the corn that the United Nations sent to Kenya. As you remember, some of the shipment winds up on the illegal market, where the maize is sold for incredibly low costs. What impact do you believe this will have on the corn producers in your area? You might as well put down your hoes now, local farmers. The United Nations World Food Programme is unmatched. And if there were a famine the following year, Kenya wouldn't have any reserves to fall back on because the farmers collapse under this pressure. It's a straightforward yet deadly loop. The textile industry is no different. The textile industry in Nigeria employed 137,000 people in 1997. The number fell to 57,000 by 2003. Why? Due to the fact that supposedly decent Europeans put their old clothing in a suitcase and sent it to Africa, where it is sold for extremely low costs. Additionally, due to the price, Africans would rather purchase these European garments than ones created in their own continent. In actuality, aid has harmed Africa more than has helped. Africa is now perceived as a defenseless continent that is powerless to defend itself. However, this has to be changed. Foreign help is unnecessary for Africa. Without aid, Africa would have to figure out how to make money on its own. Africa would be compelled to produce and engage in commerce with other African nations. Africa will be compelled to upgrade its infrastructure. Farmers will have to visit the farm if there is no free produce available to sell at a discount. Without assistance, Africa won't disappear. Africa will emerge stronger instead. What do you think? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.